Hi, this is the deep dive about Donorfy communications and the features we have available for you in Donorfy to help you communicate the right things to the right people at the right time. And we're going to go through all those tools here today. So let's have a look at what we're going to discuss. We're going to first of all look at defining what communications means and Donorfy's role in that. So the tools we have available and what they do, and also what they don't do, so that you know where to draw the line and where to seek other tools to do some of those things. We're going to look at 4 worked examples in some detail so that you can work through them if they are things you want to do in your own setting with your Donorfy and your communications tools, and how to actually get those things working and up and running. So we'll be looking at those. We'll be looking also about how communications are handled by the integrated services to Donorfy. So Donorfy itself need not be the whole answer to how you communicate with your supporters. It might be that the integrated tools can also take some of that from you as well. So we'll be looking at what they do. Then we'll have a look at some tips and FAQs from our support desk about the kinds of things that they hear about from people using Donorfy on a daily basis, and some tips really around some of the potential gotchas that you might have when you try to communicate to your constituency from Donorfy and the other tools concerned. So let's start by just clarifying what we mean by communications. And really they break down into 2 kinds. There are the one-to-many communications, where you are communicating to many people at once in a personalized way by putting placeholders in there so that you can refer to them by name and that kind of thing. And you would do that generally by picking a segment of your database, a subset of your database, in order to communicate with, not the whole database. It might be people, for example, in a smaller group, people who are attending an event or have registered to attend an event, and you might want to get a message out to all of them. You might be sending out a newsletter. One of the more sort of common forms of communication is the need to send an e-newsletter, monthly, quarterly, whatever you do. Then there's the one-to-one, or you might call them transactional emails and communications, and they are typically things like an acknowledgement following a donation. So one person's made a gift, you immediately want that followed up automatically by a thank you note that goes out. You may want to do it manually, but the process of sending a one at a time type of message rather than to a big group. That might be also in the shape of a sequence of emails, a supporter journey or a donor journey sequence following some kind of trigger event. And then of course there are marketing communications which are completely outside of the realm of your CRM, such as your social media presence and how you communicate with the wider world, above and beyond what you know in Donorfy. So communications is done depending on the size of the organization, either by the one person who perhaps raises funds, keeps donors happy, keeps them informed. That person also gets the job of communications often for the organization, and that's quite common. But in larger settings, you'll find the comms person or a comms team even, where communications is partly about fundraising, partly also about other things like operations, policy, volunteering. So communications team would coordinate comms from across the board. But when it boils down to it, all communications you can think about as having the same kind of structure. You need to know what is it you're trying to send out. Is it an email? Is it a postal appeal? Is it a phone call, SMS? That's what it is and what it's for. And then who is the audience? Is it everyone who gave last year? Is it someone who's just given something as a one-to-one communication? Who is the recipient intended to be? What are we actually saying? So what's the content and the design? And that obviously has a bearing on where we design it. And when are you sending? Under what circumstances? Under what trigger? Is there some kind of event that drives you sending that? So that's a kind of set of questions you need to ask about any communication you're going to be sending, and we will look at how those things are dealt with when it comes to Donorfy and the other tech tools at your disposal. So let's then look at the specific tools in Donorfy that help you communicate effectively. And these are features of Donorfy that if you've been using it for any length of time, you will already know. There are deep dives about each one of them, I think, separately. So we're not going to go into that much depth on each one, but we're going to mention them in the context of why they're useful when you're planning your communications to your constituency. So firstly, Donorfy's prime role in communications is about selecting, this is when we're talking one-to-many, selecting the audience, so the subset of your database to whom you're going to send some kind of message. And that is usually done by using tags. So you'll be familiar with tags, we'll jump into them in a moment, but you can select from your database by saying I want everyone with a tag of low value donor or medium value donor or volunteer. Any kinds of tags that represent some kind of engagement you could use as your means of selection when selecting an audience. The lists feature is the feature that will do that selection for you using the filter tool to filter by tags and any other characteristics. You can respect the channel consents, so mail, email, phone and SMS, so that you don't send things to people against their will or even against the law where you haven't got consent or the right to do so. And the comms preferences, are they the kinds of things, the subjects, the purposes for which communications are sent out that the person wants to hear from you about? So are you, you can filter based upon people's preferences as well as the consents, which are the more black and white legal based ones. Then you can also get into multi-segment selections, which is more of an advanced tool, which we'll jump into, something that a lot of people don't know exists in Donorfy, but I'm about to unveil all of that to make it public. But you can create some fairly sophisticated multi-segment selections. You can update the comms history in Donorfy by adding activities to someone's timeline automatically when they've been communicated with or to, and you can track responses to a particular communication. So communications often result in some kind of call to action, and you're going to want to track the responses, be it donations or people filling out gift aid applications or declarations, whatever it's going to be. You'll want to track those using campaigns. So Donorfy does do some communication delivery. It delivers transactional or one-to-one emails, so things like the send document feature and the automated acknowledgements out through your Office email system, whether you're using Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace. I think I've got those right. They seem to change their name often, but I think they're the latest names at the time of presenting. But what Donorfy doesn't do is it doesn't deliver the one-to-many communications. That's where we integrate with a tool like MailChimp, for example, or where you export your data to be a data source for a mail merge with Microsoft Word, or even to send to your mailing house if you've outsourced the delivery mechanism to a mailing house for physical mailings. So just in summary, Donorfy is more concerned with selection of the audience, who things go to, and letting you do that when it's a bulk one-to-many communication. And then in the one-to-ones, we do deliver some through your email system. Or you can print single letters off, as it were, inside of your organization and post them yourself. But the one-to-many comms are delivered by MailChimp and Word or your mailing house. So let's just jump a bit deeper into tags. So if you haven't been using Donorfy very long, or you have and you just want a refresher, this is just refreshing you about those things. So tags, as we see on the right hand side there, is a panel on the constituent profile showing an array of tags which describe what this person means to us, how they have engaged with us. How do those tags get there? Well, they can get there manually by you clicking in that blank area and picking a new tag and putting it on their record. That person is then tagged with whatever that tag is. They can be applied automatically as a professional feature using auto tags. So a tag can be automated based upon some rules that you set. So you can see our donor medium value there. That might be people who've given between certain value bands over a certain time period, and that's automatically applied and removed after perhaps it hasn't happened for 2 years or whatever your time frame is for calling someone an active donor. So auto tagging is another way of getting them on there. You can apply tags according to a list selection. So if you're in lists and you've created a constituent list full of, or a transaction list, and you've got a load of people listed, you can hit a button there to apply a tag to all those people, and you can de-apply them or remove them using that method as well. You can import tags, and you can add tags through Donorfy forms. So if someone's filling out a volunteer form, it could tag them with volunteer applicant automatically without them knowing, but that's what happens in your CRM. And you can also add tags through the API if you're a technical person building an integration. So tags are useful for that visual side, but also vital for selection in lists. So we can see a little screenshot here out of a list in Donorfy, where we are selecting anyone who has either of those first two tags, so donor high value or donor medium value, and must have both of the other two tags, so volunteer and DBS checked. So we're looking for all medium or high value donors who happen to be volunteer and DBS checked. And that's a filter using tags, and it simplifies things a lot. You don't have to do lots of sub-queries and going through transactional history just to work out who's a high value donor. You've got a tag there which simply does it in one easy move. So that's what we use tags for in the context of selections. We use lists then to select people and filter people according to those tags. So constituent lists are your selections for comms. A constituent list is a list where you have in the result set, shown at the bottom half of the screen, under the bit you can see here now, the constituent list will show you one row per constituent, and your filter for which constituents you want to see comprises really two main filters. Firstly, there's the preferences filter, the bit at the top here, where we're showing including constituents with any of these channel settings. So this particular list is asking for people with permission to mail of yes or unknown, and any of these purpose settings. The reason, the purpose, the subject for communicating with them is fundraising. So we're again only letting people through this filter if they've said yes to fundraising communications, or we haven't heard from them. We don't know. By implication, it's omitting people who've said, don't mail me or don't talk to me about fundraising. And then there's a second filter, the main sort of business filter, if you like, or the filter that then lets you run amok through the whole thing with setting the other conditions. So this one is showing, is filtering on people without a blank address line, so a non-empty address line, so we can actually send them something by post. But you can have other filters in there. You know, which part of the world are they from? Are they tagged with other tags like volunteering and what have you? When you get the results up, the results show in the bottom half of a list. You can then browse them, just look at them, be interested, see who's on there, or you can export them to a CSV file. You can produce a PDF report of them if that's what you want to do, or you can sync them to MailChimp, which we'll do in a moment with one of our examples. Lists are also used, importantly, for auto-tagging, so setting the conditions with which a tag gets automatically applied. They're also used for the basis of conditions in triggers, and also used in multi-segment selections. So we've covered tags, we've covered lists. We're going to cover one more thing before we get into some examples, which is the preference center. So we've already mentioned it in passing. This is the place where you set the channel consents and the purposes or the reasons for which we can communicate people. They can update those themselves using self-service. We can update them, you can update them through Donorfy in this form, which is part of their profile. Self-service widget is part of the professional edition of Donorfy, and you can import them as well using the file uploader and using the API. So you respect those consents and those purposes using those filters we showed just now in the lists. So let's look at some examples and work through them. So the first one is the top one in this table. Just listed out a few kind of example communications here, the first 4 of which, of those 5, we will go through in this presentation. But just give you a sense really of how a communication exercise gets built up. So, for example, in our email campaign, the top one, it's going to be a newsletter which goes out ultimately through MailChimp. On the far right hand side there, that's the delivery is MailChimp. The column to the left of that is how we design it. Where does the template, where does the content sit, and where's the designer? And that's in MailChimp in this case. How are we going to pick people to send? Well, we're going to update from our Donorfy system the list in MailChimp, the audience as they now call them, in MailChimp. And that will update aspects of each subscriber as well, such that we can make our email campaign dynamic. So we can put some dynamic content in there. Or actually, I think conditional content is the correct word for it. So various kinds of communication shown on this table. We'll work through them all piece by piece, so you can work out how to piece them together yourselves. So this first one then, email campaign, so our newsletter with conditional content. We're going to use our newsletter as a means to nudge people who have made a donation but haven't yet made a gift aid declaration to us. And we're going to see that campaign go out through MailChimp but make it visible in Donorfy, in people's timelines, and also on the corresponding campaign analytics page in Donorfy. And we're going to make sure that people who receive this are opted in to email comms, so that we don't fall foul of the PECA legislation, which means we need consent for everyone we send an email to. So let's work through it. First thing you're going to need is a Donorfy account, which I'm guessing you have if you're listening to this webinar at the moment. And it needs to be set up, the integration to MailChimp needs to be set up and switched on so that we can make that happen. There is a whole deep dive about MailChimp integration and knowledge base articles aplenty about how all that works. So if you haven't connected Donorfy to MailChimp yet, then I would advise you to do that first of all. But the first thing we're going to do after that is create a tag which is going to be the basis of us putting that conditional content in the email as to whether they ought to take up a gift aid declaration with us or not. So I'm going to go into Donorfy here and into my settings, and I've got a tag in my engagement area called gift aider. Now, gift aider is a tag which you can imagine then sits on a constituent record. Just scroll down, I can see Andrew Pritchard here. This is his tags panel. Got a tag there called gift aider. So he has been tagged. Go back to the other tab where we were setting it up. This is where we're defining that tag in our settings in Donorfy. You need to be an admin to be in this part. But part of defining your tag is to set up the auto tag rules. Now this is something that obviously you can only do if you've got the professional tool, professional subscription of Donorfy. And the basis of an auto tag is that it has to be present on a list in order for someone to receive that tag. So there's a gift aiders list which we've previously created. So every night Donorfy is going to refresh that tag on every constituent's record and either take it away if it existed and they no longer have an active gift aid declaration, or put it on if they didn't have one before but they do now. So this is an accurate, up-to-date tag on every constituent record that has a gift aid declaration. So that's the first step. We're then going to make sure that our MailChimp list has got some kind of field or property in order to store that from Donorfy, such that when you create your campaign to send out your newsletter, you can have the necessary bits in MailChimp to know whether or not to put this invitation to make a gift aid declaration. So I'm no MailChimp expert, but I'm going to pop into MailChimp here, go to our audience. We're going to find our mailing list here, which is called A Great Cause mailing list. And we can see in our contacts, we have these things called groups. and in groups I've got one called gift aid. Within gift aid I've got some sort of subgroups within the gift aid group, and those groups are current, potential and declined. So any subscriber to your Donorfy list will have one or the other of these settings: current gift aider, potential gift aider or declined. So we need to make sure that Donorfy's gift aider tag, you remember this tag over here, we need to make sure that that populates for every subscriber in your MailChimp the fact that they're a current gift aider, so that when we do that campaign we can not invite them to make yet another gift aid declaration if we don't need to. We'll just ask the people we want to. So we go back to our list of things to do. We're going to map the Donorfy gift aider tag to that current gift aid current group. How do you map it? Well, you go into your Donorfy settings, go into integrations rather, go to MailChimp, and then you go to settings, and you pick the audience that you're going to integrate with your Donorfy list. It's this one here. Yay, Great Cause mailing list. We've got various mappings already set up, one of which is gift aider. So our gift aider tag in Donorfy is populating our gift aid current group in MailChimp. So when that mapping is set up, the next thing you do is you run a constituent list in Donorfy and send it to MailChimp to update all those people in MailChimp with the correct gift aid setting, and also add new people in. You might have people who have come into Donorfy that aren't yet on your MailChimp list. They might have made a donation online, and this is the process where we push those records across to MailChimp. So how do we do that? We go to our lists. I have a list ready set up here called MailChimp Sync or something. Sync individuals to MailChimp, and it's doing a certain amount of checking, only going to pick up those who've said yes to email, so we're respecting the consents, and we do have an email, proper email address in their record. This is my results. I click on the MailChimp monkey icon there and click preview update, and it will start the process of sending across your it gives you a chance to preview it, but after you've said OK to that, it will send across into your MailChimp audience all the people it doesn't already have, and update all of their gift aid. Any other mapped properties will be updated when it gets to MailChimp as well. So we've done step 4. Step 5 is the fun part. You then want to create yourself a MailChimp newsletter campaign. So this is where you create your the content, the look and the feel of the whole thing. So we're going to find ours here. As I said earlier, I'm no expert in MailChimp, so apologies in advance for this campaign. But here's my newsletter, February 2021. It's got who it's going to, all the usual MailChimp stuff, then the content itself. Click on Edit Design, and we will see the design of the content. Now, importantly, let's go back to my steps before so this is where we put our conditional merge tags. So here is our beautiful newsletter. It's got a logo at the top, a headline, it's got some content, topic 1, topic 2, topic 3 down there. But the first part is, if you like, a kind of a welcome. It's got some special code in it. Now, I don't know if you can see that clearly on the screen, but it's saying, this code is saying if they're in the current gift aid group, then the content for them is going to be, thanks for gift aiding your donations, or it makes a big difference to us, or whatever it's going to be, or it could just be nothing. But if they are not a current gift aider, it'll then display the second part instead, which is, did you know with gift aid we can add 25%, blah 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 blah. Click here to go to to opt into gift aid, and a logo and what have you there as well. So this saves us writing 2 or 3 different campaigns in MailChimp to a little subsets, which you then get a bit of a mess sometimes with keeping them all separate and making sure that everyone has received what they should receive. This makes it possible to create one newsletter and have variable content in it. Now, gift aid isn't the only thing that you can vary on. You might vary on, people who've supported a certain project or a certain fund might get an update about that fund conditionally as part of the design of your campaign here in MailChimp. So Donorfy is providing the data, the selection data, and the characteristics of each of those people in that selection, so that MailChimp can make it more personalized. So you send the campaign through MailChimp. You optionally then associate the campaign in MailChimp with a Donorfy campaign. Why would you do that? Well, two reasons. One, it enables you to see the timeline entries against everyone's record. So I'll do that in a moment. But if I just go back to a campaign here in Donorfy, it was the 2021 campaign, wasn't it? Newsletter Feb 2021. So in the Analytics tab, you can scroll to the very bottom, drop down a list. These are your MailChimp. This is coming straight out of your MailChimp account. These are your MailChimp campaigns. And by associating your Donorfy campaign, Newsletter Feb 21, with your MailChimp campaign, you can not only see the analytics for that MailChimp campaign, and these are dynamic, these will change every time you log in, the number of opens, and what have you, but you'll also see on the particular constituent's timeline, if you scroll down to the bottom here, make sure this button is checked, MailChimp history, at the bottom there of the little filter side, it will show, there you go, latest thing at the top here is this guy has received the MailChimp campaign. This isn't data in Donorfy, this is data in MailChimp that we're showing in the Donorfy timeline. So it's live, and when that changes, if he opens that email, next time you look at his timeline, it will show that he's opened it, and gives you a sense of his engagement perhaps there as well. So that, to recap, is using MailChimp to design a campaign with some conditional content. This is an email from someone who's already got gift aid. Here's our newsletter, thanks for gift aiding. Here's the email from someone who's not made a gift aid declaration yet. Why don't you make a gift aid declaration? The call to action on that, by clicking here, takes us in this case to a Donorfy form. So you may or may not know, but you can use a Donorfy form purely for the purposes of opting into gift aid. When they submit that, that will update their record with a gift aid declaration, and then that will unlock any unclaimed gift aid throughout the past 4 years for donations they've made in your next gift aid claim. So that's a useful little feature in itself to know that you can do that. And of course, seeing it on the timeline as we just saw. So that was example number one. The others are a little bit shorter. So let's just work through then what they look like. So the next example is, rather than a one-to-many, like we just discussed, this is a one-to-one, where we are using Donorfy to create a template for an acknowledgement or a thank you as a result of a donation through a Donorfy form. It could also be through a Donorfy widget, which is, as you know, if you use it, the more flexible look and feel to a donation form that your web designer can build into Donorfy, into the website, and have it work direct with Donorfy. So either way of giving, whether it's through a form or through a widget, can automate the sending of an acknowledgement. Now this will go out whether the donation was worth, £1 or £1,000. It's not anything with any conditionality about it at all, but it's a useful feature. So let's just look at how that's set up. First thing you need to do is build a document template. So I'm going to go to settings here in Donorfy, again an admin function, and search for doc. And we've got our documents here, show all of them, and I've got one here called one-off thank you email, which if I look at it, this is the design of that email. Now you can let your web designer loose on this if you want, and there's the ability for you to do all of that in code, or do it through a graphical editor like this. We've got placeholders, so dear John, latest amount, thank you for your gift of £50. And these are placeholders which are documented in the knowledge base. There's a long list of them. Just be aware that not all placeholders correspond to a donation. Some of them correspond to recurring payment instructions and other bits of data in Donorfy, so just check carefully that the placeholder you're using is relevant to the context in which you are using it. And images as well, just make sure that they're hosted in a place that's publicly accessible, otherwise they won't look good when the email is sent. So this is our email set up in Donorfy in the document creation tool there in configuration. So we've done the first step. The next step is to set up our form. So we've got a donation form that we want to be the thing that sends, upon completion, sends an acknowledgement document out to the donor. Excuse me for a moment while I'm just getting this one to show. Okay, so this then is the definition of our donation form. It has a URL, and then that's the URL that you're going to associate with your call to action in your social media posts or whatever it is that you're getting people to go to that form by. It could be embedded within your website, so you don't need to publish it as a separate URL. Just publicize your website instead. But one of the important aspects about the form in the context we're talking about is the fact that it's a donation form. Within the donation form, you can specify what the form looks like in terms of what options it gives you, one-off gifts, monthly, recurring gifts, payment by card, payment by direct debit, PayPal, Apple Pay, all those things. But an important aspect on the middle tab of the donations area, the processing tab, is the acknowledgement. So this is the acknowledgements area here, is allowing us to select which template we're going to be sending out in response to donations made on this form, and whether to send them or not. If you don't tick that box, it will queue them up for sending, and you can modify them at your will and send them out one by one later in the day. But if this is ticked, it will send them out as soon as the donation hits Donorfy, which is as soon as they've made it online. And so that's the two halves. You create your document template there, as we just saw, and you mark it for sending immediately or storing up to the end of the day or whenever you want to send your acknowledgements, choosing the template that you wish to send. So that's an example of sending emails out through Donorfy. Bear in mind that this is a one-to-one transactional email that goes out through Donorfy via your email server settings. So email server settings are in your Donorfy setup. So in configuration, search for email server settings, and this particular one is going out through Office 365. They've just renamed it to Microsoft 365, so we'll have to change that at some point. But it's going out through there. Now it could go out through your Gmail or Google Workspace account instead, but it does need setting up in there first. So we don't send the emails as such, we push them through your email system. So you have full control then over other things about emails like security and what have you. So that was a one-to-one email acknowledgement from a donation on form. Let's change gear now and go to physical mailings. So these are postal mailings for a particular appeal. And this is showing you a feature which isn't sort of particularly well known in Donorfy, but it's quite a deep professional level feature, hence it's only available on our Pro plan. And the scenario is that you have an appeal to go out, and you may have a fairly big audience associated, that you want to receive that appeal. But of course, they're not all the same. Yes, you can personalize it with a dear whoever, dear John, or dear whatever their name is. That's one form of personalization. But often the personalization needs to go beyond that according to their past behavior. So if they're a recurring donor, for example, or they're a long-serving donor, or they're a high-value donor, or they're a donor that has previously given to another project of a similar kind, you might vary the pack that you send out. You might vary not only the copy itself, but the content that you send out, and you'll want to keep track of what you sent to whom, which segment they were in. So that's where this word segment comes in. It's a way of identifying discrete audiences within your main audience and making sure that they get the right communication according to their, who they are and what you know about them. So we're going to go through a little example here, which is an appeal where we're going to break it up into about 6 segments. Some organizations we've worked with in the past will break some of their appeals up into dozens of segments, 70, 80 segments, which is quite fine-tuned messaging to some of them, because there aren't that many in some of the segments, but it's often something that you will need to test and need to understand what works and what doesn't work. But here's how we manage that in Donorfy. So let's go to Donorfy campaigns, and the campaign, the appeal, which we're about to run, is something we're calling the Clearwater campaign. And the campaign is much like any other campaign in Donorfy. It has a title, it has what coding is the money going to be coded under when it comes in under that campaign. But we're using this campaign members tab here. Now, this campaign members tab is a way of defining who are the members, who is the audience for this campaign. And it's all based around lists. So you'll have had to have created a number of lists first before you come in here to segment your database. And I'll work through what those lists look like so that you can do that. But the structure of this page is quite straightforward once you understand what it's doing. And that is that the first part here, the list that contains the campaign members, this is your master list. So let's say you have a database of 25,000 constituents, or multiply that by 10 if you want, or whatever. But let's say it's 25,000. And you know in your database there's a number of people who've said they don't want to receive appeals, they don't want to receive any mail from you, full stop, whether it's appeals or whatever it is. And you're going to want to take your audience down from that full 25,000. Some of them may be deceased or whatever as well. So you're going to want to bring that down to a selection, which is people who can be mailed, people who have said yes, they're happy or they're not unhappy to receive appeals. And yeah, they're not archived or for any reason. So that's the first list. Now this mailable individuals for appeals is just a list. It's a constituent list in Donorfy that was created in the lists feature. And if I want to find out what's in it, I can click on open list here, and it opens it on a different tab and it shows me the structure of that list. So as you can see, it's everyone who's up for a mailing or they haven't said no, and everyone who's said yes to fundraising or they haven't said no. And it's all in, we're only allowing, this is an individuals mailing, not a companies and trusts or anything else. So constituent type there, and the address line 1 can't be empty. All right. So I'll pop back to the campaign. We just clicked on that button to see what that was. But there's a universe there, if you like, a first set of constituents we're going to mail. That might be 23,000 out of your 25,000. Then we want to check the characteristics of each of those 23,000 people. My numbers are much smaller, perhaps I'll work with my numbers here. So we've got 101 constituents in our universe. Of those 101, I want to first of all check whether they have an active recurring payment instruction with us, meaning they're a regular donor, regular giver. If they are, and there's 23 I can see who are in that group, that's the communication they will get. All right, so you've worked out that your most important group are your regular donors. You want to keep them happy, they're good for the long term. So that's the first thing you'll want to know about them. It may be that they fall into other segments further down the list, but because this does the deduplication for you, this is going to mean that they only get that top one. They won't also get other communications if they happen to fit. So it's a bit like a waterfall. They go into the first level. If they fit that and belong there, then they stay there. If not, they tumble down to the next level, and then they're tested for the next one, which is in this case people who've given over £100 this year. Now there's no one in that group, so this is telling me something already. I might want to shuffle my my segments around a bit, or I might want to change my boundaries of value boundaries. And make it a different setup. And the same actually is for my 50 to 100. There's 0 constituents in there. But I do have 22 constituents inside my in up to £50 a year. Then we've got a segment called Gave Last Year But Not This, so people who you might consider are lapsing or about to lapse, so you want to give them the chance and maybe a special message to say it was good that you were a donor then, but why not give this year as well? And then you might want to send something to the rest. So these are all specific messages, and you can have as many of these as you like. I've got 5, I think, in here. And then I've got the rest, to whom you might want to send a generic message. So you can add further segments. These are just lists. So I might want to add a list of, I don't know, people who attended the gala ball. There you go. Nothing to do with donation levels or anything like that, but I'll just give that segment a shortcut name. Gala ball, save changes. It's popped it down to the bottom. I can move it right near the top. Let's say they're quite an important group. And then it's going to have to go away and recalculate itself. So you do this rebuild thing here, and that will go do a background job and refresh this screen. We won't wait for it, but it'll refresh this screen with the latest numbers. So the order of segments matters because that's the waterfalling process. And obviously the selection criteria within that matters as well. So when it's all looking good, you then prepare your download files. That's going to download, export to CSV so that you can merge it with Word or send it to your mailing house, a separate file for each segment. So the first one's going to have 23 constituents in it and so on. This one will have 22 constituents in it. And this one will have 8 and 48 in the rest, so that they can then do the mailing. And it will update Donorfy when you prepare those download files. It will update the activities in people's timelines to show not only which mailing they got, but which segment they were in at time of mailing, so that you can do analysis when you get people sending in donations or going to a website and donating under this campaign, whatever it is. You can then do the ROI analysis at detailed segment level, if you wish, as well as campaign level. Okay, so that's a way of selecting an audience, breaking them into discrete segments, and have that update Donorfy with what segment they were in. And we've done that in the way of, because it's mail, we're allowed to use legitimate interest, so we've basically included everyone who has said their or hasn't said that they're unhappy to receive mail. Okay, and these screenshots just a reminder of that process. So the final example I want to show you is a donor journey sequence. So this is using Donorfy to kick off an automation of a 3-message sequence. In this case, it could be a 10-message sequence or a single message, it's up to you. Triggered by a donation being received into Donorfy at what you might call mid-level. So this is just a definition which is something that you can define the parameters for. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the campaign in MailChimp. So let's go back to MailChimp, because it's MailChimp that sends these emails. So these are a kind of I guess they're a hybrid between a one-to-many and a one-to-one, because they're built in MailChimp, which suggests one-to-many traditionally, but MailChimp has this neat feature in it where it can take an audience of one, as it were, and put it through a sequence of emails that you can then know are going out as a result of something happening. So what we're going to do is go to our campaigns, and I've got a campaign on here called Mid-Level Donors. It's an automated campaign, so let's just filter by that. Mid-level donor journey emails, and you can set these email campaigns up in your MailChimp. There may be some which edition of MailChimp you're on to consider with these things. I don't think it's on the very basic edition. I think it's on the next one up, but you'll need to check MailChimp's website about that. But what we're going to do is we're going to just edit that campaign because it's easier to see what's going on. So this campaign is an email that goes out immediately after an API call is posted, it says there, which basically is Donorfy waking it up and saying, right, send that email immediately. And then, in this case, 4 days later, send this email, and you can design that email in here. and then 10 days later send this one. All right. Now you can put in some branching in that and some conditionality that says if they've responded or clicked through on the previous one, then stop sending the next ones and stuff like that. There's some flexibility in that at the MailChimp end. But we've done our first bit, which is to create our automated campaign in MailChimp, and there is a separate article about that and a video about setting that up if you want to go deeper into that. Then you're going to create a list. Lists feature heavily in all of this, don't they? But we're going to create a list which forms the condition under which the trigger will fire. So we're using Donorfy triggers. This is the first time I think we've mentioned triggers in this webinar, and the trigger is something that fires according to some conditions that we will set. So our list, if I go back to Donorfy, looking in lists here, and search for mid-level donors. That's not the one I meant. Let me just go back. It's the transaction list, I think. There you go. Mid-level donor transactions, trigger condition. This will make more sense in a moment when you look at the trigger, but you need to set up a list which will make sure it doesn't send out lots of different emails at the same time. So we'll come back to that one in a moment when the context suits it. Now we're going to create the trigger. So this is a Donorfy job. So let's go into Donorfy triggers, which are in data management. This is available in Essentials. You get up to 3 triggers available when you're in Essentials. So we've got a trigger here called mid-level donor journey, and this is how that trigger is defined. So a trigger has to have a trigger event to start with, and that trigger event is when a transaction is added. Transaction being a donation, typically in Donorfy. So when a transaction is added, when a certain condition is met, and this is where our list comes in. So it's where our transaction list, called mid-level donor transactions trigger condition, if that donation wouldn't appear in that list, then the trigger doesn't fire. What are the conditions on that list? Well, it's the value band. £250 to £1,000 is what I'm calling mid-level. Date paid today. It might as well be that because a trigger runs and it instantly decides whether or not it's going to fit the conditions or not. So rather than make it trawl through all of the donations, we'll say just check today's transactions for that value band. They've got to be an individual. There's no point sending this donor journey to a trust maybe or a company, and it's a donation as opposed to an event purchase or a merchandise purchase or anything like that. So they're the conditions. Okay, so that's that part. And then the final part is the action. What's the thing we're going to do if all of the above is satisfied? We're going to send out a MailChimp automation, and we pick the MailChimp automation campaign. So this drop-down list is coming live out of MailChimp. These are all of the automation campaigns set up in my MailChimp, one of which is mid-level donor journey. You can choose to let that happen or not based upon whether they've said yes or no to certain kinds of communication, or just leave it as don't check, and save changes. So that's the trigger set up. And what that means is, without sort of putting a mid-level donation in myself at this moment, that means that will fire when a donation is received into Donorfy. So whether that's given online or it's a check that's entered, that transaction added trigger event will fire as long as it meets the conditions of being in that value band. The first email will get sent. You don't have to then do anything because Donorfy then sits waiting for the next time to elapse where they've got to send the second email, then the third email. So you'll know those things are going out as a result of the trigger. Triggers themselves have a history, so you get logs here where you can see what's running and what has failed, if anything's failed for whatever reason. But basically once you've set a trigger, you can just set it and forget it and it will carry on running. So that's the process for a donor journey sequence from Donorfy through to MailChimp. So just to finish up, a couple of things. First of all, as you know, Donorfy is surrounded by integrations to other services, so we'll quickly look at those. If you're using Eventbrite, you don't need to use Donorfy to do the comms to the people who have registered. So maybe you received some comms as a result of registering for this webinar, in which case you would have received some emails that go out through the Eventbrite emails to attendees feature. Now, you won't see those in the Donorfy timeline of every constituent, but maybe you don't need to, because that's just part of the event rather than part of their general engagement. But make good use of that. That does work. We're users of that as well as a company, and that takes care of those comms. Just Giving and Virgin Money have configurable comms to people who set up pages and people who give money through them. So again, you're not going to want a kind of automated comms necessarily through Donorfy each time that a new page gets set up or each time that a new donation comes in, because those platforms can be set to thank those people appropriately from there. Facebook don't do a lot in terms of comms, but thankfully Donorfy does. So just a quick word about how that looks. If I go into Facebook Giving Tools, if you're using this feature, you'll know that you're pulling in a file every now and then from Facebook with donations in it, and also information about the fundraisers that people have set up, birthday fundraisers and what have you. And you can use Donorfy as a messaging tool. This is obviously a one-to-one type of thing, but you can see these colourful little icons on here, and they represent the messages we've already sent to these people for this fundraiser. So if I look at Fred's birthday fundraiser for a great cause, we've sent him a thank you. I'm going to create a new message for him now in our sequence of messages, which is hints and tips for fundraising from your friends and family. In doing so, it's taking me, having copied the text of this canned message, it's taking me to his fundraiser. I can then message him. I never remember how to do this. How do I message a fundraiser? There we go. I can message him and paste in my message. Looks like I've done it before, but there you go. Thanks for being a great fundraiser for a great cause. We're happy you're supporting us. Here's some hints and tips. And then also we've put a form link in there. Just got to send that, make sure it's to myself so I don't upset anybody. So that message has gone to him. He'll read that message. He'll see that form link, and that form link will open up a Donorfy form for him to tell us more about himself, because Donorfy, and give us permission to send things to him, because Facebook doesn't give us much, but you'll want to sort of hydrate that information by asking him to complete more information about himself and submit it, so we know that. So Facebook integration tools in Donorfy are a useful comms tool. And we can now see that as a result of clicking that button, we've now sent Fred two things, the thank you and the hints and tips. You can set up all your canned message templates up here in messages in Facebook. And so if I want to add a new message to my message templates for birthday fundraisers, I can just add one and call it an encouragement message or something. And then put in there whatever I like, including a placeholder for the form to tell us more about him. So that's how messaging is best handled around Facebook. Then other integrations, so donor text giving, by its nature it's a text platform, so it does all the thank yous and follow-ups for gift aid opt-ins itself. Go Cardless, if you leave Go Cardless to its own devices, it will send its own branded emails to your subscribers, to your regular donors, both on initial mandate creation and also every time it's about to collect a payment, which if it's monthly can be an irritating reminder that you're about to have some money removed from your account. Donorfy can override that. So if you're interested in your own personalized, from your charity, direct debit notifications and ones that don't appear every month, you can define those in Donorfy. So I would just search the knowledge base for Donorfy for Go Cardless notifications, and then run it past our support team, who will approve that for you. We have to approve it by direct debit legislation or whatever it is, rules. And then you can have some nice looking Go Cardless comms coming out of your Donorfy. And Stripe gives you a receipt. Not a lot you can do with it. I think you can put a logo on it and some limited wording, but Stripe will give a receipt to a donor. But that's no substitute for those automated acknowledgements that you can say nicer things in if you wish. There are some tips and FAQs here. I'll leave you to read those if they are interesting to you, but our support team regularly answering questions about how these things work, and there are one or two things there that are good to know if you are embarking on this journey. There are numerous places you can get help for all of these things and more with Donorfy. So go to our support center, which is support.donorfy.com. Go to our knowledge base within there or submit a ticket. And then if you're not already a member, you'll hopefully find the Donorfy chat community very helpful. There's a large and growing number of people on there where maybe people who've sat in your position have solved a problem that would be useful for you to know how they did it. So the community is all about helping one another, and we kind of dive in there from time to time as well and help. So that was the comms deep dive. I hope you found that useful. Look forward to seeing you in one of those forums or the other, and wish you all the best with it. Thank you.